I was at a dinner party a few weeks ago, one of those where everyone's recounting their latest wins, their promotions, their whirlwind trips. In the middle of it all was a friend I hadn't seen in a while. As people traded stories, getting louder and more animated, I watched her seem to almost physically shrink. She wasn't sad or upset. She was just quiet. Holding her glass with both hands, her gaze fixed on the table, offering a polite, minimal smile when someone spoke to her. Later, I caught her in the kitchen and asked, "Hey, you okay? You seem a bit out of it." She looked at me, and for a second the mask dropped. She gave a faint, tired smile and said, "It's not you, it's the noise. It's all the words. I feel like I have to go through physical therapy just to have a conversation." That phrase stuck with me. Physical therapy just to have a conversation. It wasn't about being an introvert or having a bad day. It was the quiet admission of a different kind of exhaustion, one where the basic act of being in the world feels like a monumental effort. It's a fatigue that no amount of sleep can fix, because it's not the body that's tired. It's the soul itself that's running on empty. And that, right there, well, that's our mission today. We're diving deep into that specific type of modern depletion, what some call existential fatigue. We're not just talking about burnout from, one tough deadline or just being physically tired after a long week.
No, it's different.
We're exploring this really profound lassitude, a kind of deep weariness that honestly no amount of rest seems to cure, because it feels less like a personal failing.
Right.
And more like a structural product of modern life itself. We really want to understand where this feeling comes from, how our culture seems to actively manufacture it through these constant demands for performance.
Yeah, the performance aspect is key.
And why we're increasingly pushed to cope with it by, turning rest itself into another kind of work, often profitable work.
And what's absolutely vital here, I think, is recognizing that core tension you just mentioned. This exhaustion, it feels intensely individual, doesn't it?
Completely. Like it's my problem.
Like a private crisis. Yeah. A personal failure to keep up. But when we dive deep, especially looking at how this plays out in places like France, where they talk about la fatigue existentielle, it becomes really clear that it's fundamentally structurally produced.
So not just personal.
Not just personal at all. It's this pervasive societal condition, and it's driven by economics, by new work ethics. It's not just a diagnosis you get. It's something the environment creates.
Okay, so let's unpack that feeling first then, because we need to get a handle on what this exhaustion actually is before we trace where it's coming from. What's the real difference between just being physically tired and feeling, existentially empty?
It's a huge difference, and defining it carefully is, I think, really important. Existential fatigue isn't described as just muscle weariness. It's more like this profound lassitude that gnaws at the soul more than the muscles.
Gnaws at the soul. That's evocative.
It really is. It's that deep exhaustion that comes not necessarily from lack of sleep, but maybe after too much survival mode.
Right.
Or too much sustained shock, or even just prolonged indifference from the world around you, a world that keeps demanding maximum vitality, even when you're basically running on fumes.
So you can sleep for 12 hours.
You could sleep 12 hours and still wake up feeling this way, because the debt isn't physical, it's internal, it's almost spiritual.
That's the key distinction, isn't it? The body might have recovered, technically, but the psyche, the spirit, it's still damaged by the sheer effort of just being in modern society. I found the description of the sensory experience really powerful, too. How the world becomes too bright, music too loud, shelves too full.
Yeah, that image of sensory overload. It's a great way into the psychology of this fatigue. I mean, think about it. Standing in a giant shopping mall or even just scrolling through social media on a Saturday.
Overwhelming.
Completely overwhelming. You're bombarded with abundance, endless choices, noise, obligation. The world hasn't gone anywhere. Everything's still technically available, but your own access feels blocked. It's like the access has changed its lock.
Oh, okay. The resources are there, but you just don't have the energy, the key, to actually interact with them.
Exactly. The energy cost is just too high.
And because that internal access is locked, the cost of just ordinary life, basic things, it skyrockets. Simple social gestures that used to be automatic suddenly feel like these monumental, conscious efforts.
Yeah, monumental is the right word. The analogies used are almost athletic, which I find fascinating. Saying a casual hello to a neighbor isn't just a brief connection anymore.
Yeah, but
it becomes an Olympic ordeal.
Wow.
Or replying to a simple text message. It feels less like communication and more like an out-of-category climb, like those impossible Tour de France mountain stages.
That's steep.
That steep, the very social fabric, which should feel supportive, starts to feel abrasive. It actually scratches like burlap.
Which brings us perfectly back to my friend needing physical therapy just to talk. It's this exorbitant cost of entry just to participate in normal life. So if that's the starting point, this kind of collapse, what's the way back? Is there a recovery protocol being looked at, especially in France where this seems so keenly observed?
Well, the recovery is being thought about very specifically. It moves away from, quick fixes or miracle cures,
Right.
and towards something called relational physical therapy, relational.
Relational physical therapy.
Yeah, the idea is that interaction itself has become painful and requires deliberate retraining.
Mm-hmm.
So the protocol has to be minimalist, really progressive, step by step, and crucially, without any miracle promises, it's framed as a slow, deliberate re-education process across 3 key areas.
Okay, relational. It sounds incredibly intentional. Like you're literally retraining for basic human connection again. And it really acknowledges how deep the injury goes. So tell me about those 3 areas of re-education. What do they actually involve?
Okay, so first, there's what's called sensory re-education. If the world feels too bright and too loud, you have to intentionally seek out calm.
Like turning the volume down.
Exactly. A quiet cafe, maybe a park bench in the shade, avoiding aggressive noises, strong smells. The goal is to let the nervous system, which is either constantly hyper-aroused or just totally depleted, to let it slowly repair itself. It's about viewing the body not as fragile, but as being in repair. It needs quiet attention, not more stimulus right away.
It's like reducing the input to something manageable, like shutting down all the background apps on a phone that's struggling.
Precisely. Then the second part is conversational re-education. This is about actively dismantling that competitive edge that creeps into so much modern social interaction.
Ah, the one-upmanship.
Exactly. It means aiming for exchanges that are short and really concrete. Rediscovering what's called the punctuation of connection. This means actually listening, responding to what's said, rather than just engaging in that ping pong of egos that want to win instead of meeting.
That phrase, ping pong of egos, really hits home.
It does, doesn't it? It makes it clear a genuine, quiet, how are you really, is worth so much more than some loud, competitive TED Talk under caffeine.
That rejection of the ping pong game is maybe the most profound part. It acknowledges that so much of our typical social interaction is a performance, this constant draining presentation of success or cleverness.
Yeah.
And existential fatigue just makes you unable or maybe unwilling to keep up that exhausting show.
Which leads very naturally to the third pillar, trust re-education. If you're constantly exhausted, you have 0 energy left for complex emotional negotiations or guessing games.
Makes sense.
So this part is all about setting explicit, non-negotiable, really clear boundaries. It means mastering the simple, dignified art of saying no.
Without the guilt trip.
Without feeling like you have to write a 5-page essay explaining why you need rest or space. It's recognizing that your dignity, your need for boundaries, isn't something you have to beg for. It should just be observed through mutual respect.
So the ultimate test case for applying all this re-education, I remember reading about the simple social ritual of the dinner table. How does someone navigate that specific space when they're battling this kind of fatigue?
Yeah, the dinner table becomes this high-stakes scenario, doesn't it? The goal described is to invite oneself into the present without dissolving.
Without dissolving.
Meaning you have to be truly present, try to engage with genuine connection if it's there, but actively refuse to become just the service statistic for the group's conversation.
Like you're just there to absorb everyone else's energy.
Or to perform for them. The mantra is strict. Speak little, aim true. It's about conserving your energy, maintaining your integrity, acknowledging that you don't owe the table constant bubbly performance. It requires this really intentional act of self-preservation, staying framed and distinct rather than letting the group dynamics just wash over your already fragile presence.
Okay, so the symptoms are intensely personal, that dread of small talk, the email feeling like climbing a mountain. We've seen the personal cost, the Olympic ordeal of just saying hello. Now we have to pivot and look at the economic architecture, the system that seems to require us to live in this constant Olympic state. This brings us squarely into section 2. The new work ethic and how it actively produces this exhaustion.
Yes, we absolutely need to trace that foundational shift in broadly speaking, Western capitalism that produces this specific, very internalized kind of fatigue. We can draw on the work of sociologists who've analyzed this, people like Elaine Ehrenberg or Eva Illes, even if we don't name them. They point to a fundamental move away from what was called the disciplinary society and into what's now often termed the performance society.
Okay, let's nail that distinction for everyone listening. How did that older disciplinary society, say mid-20th century Fordism, differ from the one we're in now? And crucially, how did that difference impact our mental state, our well-being?
Well, in that older disciplinary society, think factories, schools, very visible hierarchies, clear rules, pathology, or suffering, was often defined by the line between what was allowed and the forbidding. The system worked through constraint, through rules. So suffering often showed up as neurosis, stemming from the conflict between obeying or breaking these clear, externally imposed rules and taboos. The cage was visible, the rules were written down, which paradoxically offered a weird kind of psychological safety. You knew who the enemy was, or at least what the rules were.
The failure felt external.
Yeah.
You failed because the system stopped you or you broke its rule.
Exactly. But in our current post-Fordist world, this society of unlimited possibilities, those hard boundaries have kind of dissolved, or seem to have. The language of management changed. It's less about compliance, more about empowerment, initiative, being yourself.
Right, all those buzzwords.
And so suffering now comes from this relentless tension, not between allowed, forbidden, but between the possible and the impossible. The central issues of our time tend to be exhaustion and depression, arising from this constant injunction to optimize, to self-manage, to endlessly generate potential.
And that's where the structure just absorbs the individual completely, isn't it?
Yeah.
The system offers this illusion of freedom and autonomy, unlimited possibilities. But then if you're failing, if you're exhausted, if you can't thrive...
It must be your fault.
Yeah, it must be because you didn't perform hard enough, weren't dynamic enough, didn't seize the opportunities. The failure gets totally internalized.
It's the ultimate sleight of hand, really. The structural shift moving to flexible work, creative industries, project-based stuff comes with this narrative of the democratization of work. But this promised freedom gets immediately flipped into self-imposed obligations, all driven by this deep existential fear of failure. This is the absolute core mechanism of the economization of the self.
So it's not just about evaluating the tasks we do between 9 and 5 anymore. We're judged, and we judge ourselves on the totality of our personality, our potential, our attitude.
Precisely. Values that used to be seen as outside of labor, things like innovation, being a good communicator, emotional intelligence, resilience, motivation, these are now absolutely central to how we're evaluated at work. And here's the really brutal part. These qualities aren't typically taught or fostered during work hours. They're things you have to cultivate yourself, trained outside actual working hours.
Wow.
The system essentially forces the worker to achieve this impossible state of inner balance and tranquility, while at the same time constantly optimizing their mental, emotional, and social abilities. You have to become this perpetual self-regulating market subject.
That requirement alone is exhausting just thinking about it. The line between work and life just completely evaporates because yourself becomes the primary capital you're responsible for maintaining, improving, optimizing 24/7.
Yes.
And this relentless psychological pressure cooker is then amplified by an economic reality that is, for many, fundamentally precarious. It's stacked against the worker.
Yeah, the psychological demand to optimize crashes head-on with the structural reality of the modern labor market. It creates this kind of debt trap. I mean, look at the data around credentialism. Decades ago, companies basically decided it was cheaper to buy skill than to build it.
So they cut internal training.
Exactly, gutted those programs. And we replaced that hands-on apprenticeship or craftsmanship model with credentialism, forcing individuals to shoulder the enormous cost of getting degrees.
And the cost of that credentialism is just paralyzing for so many. You rack up huge debt just to get the minimum piece of paper for a job that often doesn't even really need that specific degree.
It's an unsustainable bargain. The data is stark. Real wages for the average worker have barely budged, 18 cents increase in real terms over 50 years.
Unbelievable.
Yet the total lifetime cost of getting a bachelor's degree, factoring in debt interest, lost earnings while studying, it can easily top $500,000. Meanwhile, you see this rampant job inflation like that 2015 study showing 67% of production supervisor jobs asking for a degree, even though only 16% of the people actually doing the job had one.
So you're forced to pay a fortune for credentials as a prerequisite for jobs that don't need them, just to prove you're, compliant, capable of jumping through hoops.
Basically, yes. It signals trainability, maybe conformity, and that disconnect the huge personal costs versus the often low, stagnant market value of that credential, that is a definitive exhaustion trap. You're running flat out, not even to get ahead, but just to stay in the same place.
And then adding this layer of almost deliberate deception on top, it turns out a huge chunk of the jobs we're running towards might not even be real. We have to talk about this chilling reality of the ghost job economy.
This is possibly one of the most cynical and psychologically wearing aspects of the current job market. We're not talking about jobs that get filled quickly or slight admin delays. A growing number of job postings are ghost jobs.
Meaning?
Meaning listings that employers have no real immediate intention of actually filling. Research from just last year showed that online job ads were literally half as likely to result in someone getting hired compared to just 4 years prior, back in 2020.
Half as likely. So the market is actively performing this illusion of growth and opportunity that often isn't real. But why? Why would companies spend time and resources posting and maintaining these phantom listings? What's the gain for them?
Well, the motives seem pretty manipulative, and they directly target managing expectations and dealing with the fatigue of their existing employees. Surveys found a few key reasons. A big one, about 40% of hiring managers admitted, was posting jobs simply to make their company appear to be growing, look healthy to the outside world, maybe to investors.
Okay, managing perception.
But even more troubling, 34% said they use these ghost jobs to motivate overworked employees.
How?
By creating the illusion that help is on the way. See, we're hiring. Just hang in there a little longer.
Oh, that is the ultimate carrot on a stick, designed specifically to squeeze more labor out of an already depleted workforce. It's a deception aimed squarely at that existential fatigue we defined earlier.
It really feels like institutional psychological warfare, doesn't it? And the scale is massive. Some industry analysts estimate potentially 1.7 million ghost listings just on LinkedIn in the U.S. alone.
Oh.
And beyond just fooling current employees, this practice serves other strategic purposes. By constantly advertising roles, even fake ones, companies harvest huge amounts of free data on who's applying, what skills are out there, and crucially, what salary expectations are.
So they're monitoring the market.
They're monitoring wage expectations precisely. It helps them artificially influence labor supply, essentially allowing them to set wage levels on their terms, kind of insulated from actual hiring needs or competition.
So the very act of looking for a job, which already takes immense emotional and mental energy, becomes this form of unpaid labor, supplying market intelligence to the companies that probably aren't even going to hire you anyway. So when you combine all this, the precarity, the crushing debt, stagnant wages, these phantom jobs, with that constant psychological command to optimize yourself, profound disillusionment seems like the only possible result.
And that disillusionment is just another engine driving the fatigue. Think about the nature of many modern jobs, too. They're increasingly abstract, often repetitive, deeply disconnected from any tangible, meaningful outcome.
Pushing pixels, managing dashboards.
Exactly. Engaging in endless communication loops, but not seeing the direct result of your effort. So workers often get neither purpose because of the abstraction, nor prosperity because wages are stuck. Real wages, up maybe $2 since 1979? While the cost of basic necessities, especially housing, has just exploded, soaring anywhere from 29% to a crazy 85% in major cities.
So the system demands that you optimize every single part of your being, your mind, your emotions, your body, for this performance market that turns out to be economically largely a mirage. It rewards you with debt and housing costs that just race ahead of any wage growth. That, when you boil it down, seems like the high-octane engine driving this existential fatigue.
It forces you into this state of constant hypervigilance, doesn't it?
Right.
Where your energy isn't measured in physical output anymore, but in units of attention, anxiety, self-monitoring, which inevitably leads back to that relational collapse, that difficulty with basic connection we talked about in Section 1.
Which brings us perfectly to the next stage of our deep dive. What happens when this exhaustion, this structural failure, becomes so widespread that it turns into its own massive, profitable industry? We're moving into the realm of the wellness dispositive, the commodification of our distress. Let's start this section with a story that really illustrates how individuals end up processing the structural problem we just laid out. Think about someone like Antoine, described as a marketing director in Lyon. Outwardly successful, right? Nice apartment, demanding career, but consumed by that very specific low-grade existential fatigue we're discussing, an emptiness his success just couldn't touch.
Right. And faced with this deep systemic malaise, what did Antoine do? Did he, organize for better working conditions? Did he quit the toxic job?
No.
No, he turned himself into this huge, expensive self-optimization project. He wasn't trying to fix the system's problem. He was devoutly consuming its neatly packaged, individualized solutions.
We see it play out clearly. He buys the corporate mindfulness app subscription. He attends these expensive week-long yoga retreats to reconnect with his authentic self. He meticulously tracks every metric of his supposed burnout with a smartwatch. He wasn't just tired, he was actively, diligently commodifying his own existential fatigue.
Antoine's story is such a powerful allegory for how the performance society works, its insidious demands. He becomes hyper-focused on biohacking his burnout using consumer tools rather than critically examining the toxic corporate culture that probably celebrated his overwork while extracting all his surplus energy. The underlying structural issue, that relentlessly demanding economic system, it remains completely untouched. He just buys elegantly packaged products designed to make the unsustainable reality feel bearable for maybe another quarter.
And this perfectly illustrates that critical perspective on wellness. The idea that it's often not a genuine sanctuary, not a real escape, but rather a disciplinary dispositive. If the modern workplace manufactures exhaustion,
then the capitalist wellness market steps in to provide the illusion of control and recovery, but only on its own terms, governed by the same logic of performance and efficiency.
Exactly. Critical social analysis, drawing from thinkers like Foucault, argues precisely that. Wellness isn't really a retreat from labor. It's actually a new, hyper-efficient form of labor. The goal is pretty cynical, actually.
What is it?
To restore the working body as quickly and efficiently as possible, ensure maximum resource recovery, get you back in the game. And achieving that requires a specific form of work from the consumer, from you. So rest isn't downtime anymore, it's scheduled maintenance. Governed by the same metrics, the same logic of productivity that caused the burnout in the first place, that must feel exhausting in itself.
It's a profound psychological burden, and we can see this really vividly in field studies done in high-end spas and wellness centers. They reveal exactly how these spaces, which promise escape and timelessness, actually enforce performance through really rigid time and space rules.
How does that work? How do they spatialize intimacy, as it's put, if you're paying top dollar specifically to relax? How are you still on the clock?
Well, think about the transition points. You have these quiet rooms, right? They're designed spatially to suggest effortless, calm intimacy, like you've crossed a threshold into escape. Yet the moment you move into the organized activity areas, say for a class or treatment, you immediately encounter this fine temporal parcellation and encoding. Everything is timed, regulated by explicit markers. You need to arrive shortly before 1 p.m. The treatment itself lasts precisely about 15 minutes. You have to move on to the next thing 5 minutes earlier than you might naturally want to.
So the expectation isn't actually relaxation, it's punctuality. It's docility within their scheduled relaxation framework.
And you, the client, the subject, you have to internalize and perfectly execute these procedures if you want to achieve the promised optimization of physical awareness. So wellness in this context gets transformed into a specific regimented work activity. It's permeated entirely by time regimes and efficiency metrics.
This whole idea of disciplining relaxation is perfectly captured by the almost absurd figure of the relax coach. It sounds like a complete oxymoron.
The relax coach is basically the institutional demand for well-being made flesh. They often greet you with this, overly enthusiastic, I've been expecting you. They wear a specific uniform, making them visible agents of the facility's control.
And then their job is?
Their job is to actively ensure your compliance, make sure you follow the rules, stick to the strict schedule, which highlights this crucial paradox. The responsibility for actually achieving relaxation is totally externalized. It's enforced by an employee.
You're literally paying a professional to make sure you relax correctly, on time, in the right designated zone. And if you fail to relax properly, it's implicitly your failure of performance, not a failure of the rest concept itself.
And this demand for sometimes extreme performance is maybe most vivid in what's called the suffering imperative seen during certain treatments, like those intense sauna infusion rituals popular in parts of Europe. Field descriptions show that enduring strong physical discomfort, even a kind of competition, becomes a prerequisite for successful well-being.
That tension needing to suffer in order to earn the status of being well, that's deeply unsettling.
It's the ultimate display of performance under duress, isn't it? People will complain about the sauna being almost unbearably hot, yet at the same time, they're trying to convince others to stay, to endure this setting that's described as too confined and too hot.
Why?
It reveals the disciplinary core, the intense emotions, the extreme bodily discomfort, the palpable unease. They become necessary parts of the ritual. The focus shifts entirely to the body's productivity, its ability to withstand the discomfort and emerge appearing optimized, purified. You get this internal conflict between I am relaxing and the physical reality of I am suffering.
So the recovery from being overworked just becomes another job, another intensely managed task. And the final irony here is that this whole commodification of fatigue is a massive, thriving global business, which kind of proves its profitability.
Oh, it's an economy in its own right. The global well-being market is valued at something over 450 billion euros. That scale, that number, is the ultimate data point, isn't it? Fatigue isn't just some unfortunate, non-profitable side effect of modern work anymore.
No, it's a product.
It's a massively profitable product, a commodity that fuels this entire sprawling industry dedicated to selling us back the very vitality, the very energy that the corporate culture systematically extracted from us in the first place. The demand for energy has been completely decoupled from the supply of actual prosperity or security.
Okay, so we've established this existential fatigue is structurally produced by the performance society. We've seen how it's efficiently commodified by the wellness market. Now, let's zoom out again and look at the real-world public health consequences, specifically in a society where this structural crisis has been acutely analyzed. France, where that term la fatigue existentielle really gained traction.
Yeah, the situation in France is now recognized by the state itself as being quite dire. The psychological deterioration, especially among young people, has led to youth mental health being officially declared a grande cause nationale, a major national cause for the year 2025. This isn't just chatter, it's seen as a public health crisis demanding a national structural response.
What are the specific alarming statistics that forced this level of national mobilization and recognition?
Well, the data paints a really concerning picture of the psychological landscape, particularly for the young. Suicide tragically remains the leading cause of death for 15 to 35-year-olds in France. That's nearly 8,300 deaths every year.
That's staggering.
It is. And perhaps even more indicative of the underlying pressure, the prevalence of suicidal thoughts actually doubled among young adults between 2014 and 2021. It jumped from 5% reporting such thoughts to 11% in just 7 years.
Doubling of suicidal ideation in less than a decade. That's an incredibly stark indicator of the pressure cooker environment for that generation.
And this psychological distress reaches down even into early childhood. One national study found that 13% of French children aged 6 to 11 likely have a mental health disorder. The impact is then seen immediately in some of the most vulnerable sectors. Nearly 30% of students in vocational training programs, often from less privileged backgrounds, report significant anxiety or depressive symptoms.
And that translates to...
That leads directly to higher rates of absenteeism and a much greater risk of them dropping out altogether, hindering their future prospects.
So this is clearly not just a humanitarian issue, as critical as that is. It's also a massive economic burden, which reinforces the argument that this is a structural problem with systemic costs, not just millions of individual problems.
Absolutely. The youth mental health crisis is now understood as a major economic issue for France. It accounts for the largest single share of the country's health insurance expenses, exceeding 23 billion euros per year.
23 billion euros.
Yeah. And that figure includes both the direct costs of healthcare and the huge indirect costs to the economy, from lost productivity, work absences, long-term support needs. The psychological damage translates directly into macroeconomic failure.
So, given the undeniable scale of this crisis, the human cost, the financial burden, how is the French government trying to respond to these structural pressures?
Well, the national response seems to be focusing intensely on two main tracks: destigmatization and radically strengthening access to care. You see campaigns like the Talk to Feel Better initiative, which reached over 5 million young people with messages aimed at normalizing seeking psychological help. Breaking down that stigma is huge.
And what about the practical side? Access to actual care. That's usually the biggest bottleneck in mental health care systems everywhere.
Right, and this is where a potentially revolutionary policy change is slated for 2025. The plan is for the government to guarantee every French citizen the right to 12 free therapy sessions per year.
12 free sessions for everyone.
Yes. But here's the really critical systemic shift. The plan is that these sessions can be scheduled directly with a licensed psychologist. You won't need a prior medical prescription or clearance from your GP.
Well, removing that gatekeepers, the need for a doctor's note first, that is revolutionary. It essentially treats psychological health needs more like, say, needing common prescription medicine. It cuts out administrative hurdles and recognizes mental health as a fundamental, immediate public good, deserving direct access like physical care.
That seems to be the strategic goal, yes, removing those systemic barriers to getting help quickly. But of course, this brings us back full circle to our earlier critique. While these public policy efforts, the free sessions, the awareness campaigns are absolutely vital for treating the symptoms.
Right.
We have to ask, do they fix the root cause? The fundamental fabric of life, as it's sometimes called, defined by that precarity, the social isolation, the burnout culture we've discussed, that fabric seems to continue fraying.
So it sounds like trying to put bandages on wounds that are continuously being inflicted by the system itself. We're providing therapy to help people cope with the symptoms of, say, compressed modernity and aggressive neoliberal competition. But we're not really shutting down the factory that's producing the exhaustion in the first place.
That synthesis, I think, is exactly where we need to land this section. Despite significant, laudable national policy efforts to provide psychological interventions, the deeper structural mechanisms driving the crisis, the economic precarity, the performance demands remain largely unchallenged. The crisis persists because the engine demanding exhaustion is still running at full tilt.
That feels like the critical insight we're left wrestling with. We've traced this problem all the way from that singular, agonizing, personal feeling of fatigue through the theoretical critique of the big societal shift, from discipline to performance,
Right.
to the way distress gets commercialized and sold back to us.
Yeah, the wellness market.
And finally, to the national policy responses trying to manage the fallout.
And that shift to the performance society, it really did invert the whole nature of failure and exhaustion, didn't it? Back in the Fordist era, suffering often felt visibly imposed from outside, from above. It was a constraint you could maybe push against, resist.
I don't need the source.
But now suffering often feels like this internal self-imposed limitation. It stems from that impossible gap between your theoretically limitless optimized potential and your actual current exhausted reality. You feel like you're constantly failing the injunction to just be the best possible version of yourself.
It's a uniquely cruel system in that way. It demands we be constantly optimizing our personalities, our time, our connections. But then rewards so many of us with economic insecurity and precarity. The market takes our very vitality, our energy, and then turns around and sells us an expensive subscription for self-management techniques, effectively transforming even our rest into another form of measurable labor.
Which leaves us, I think, with a final necessary thought, one that builds directly on this critique of the wellness market's role. In an era that rewards and relentlessly demands constant self-optimization and productivity, even invading the private sphere of rest, perhaps the most profound, maybe even the most radical act of resistance you can undertake,
What is it?
is simply to reject the performance of wellness entirely, to actually allow yourself to be genuinely, maybe even shamelessly, tired. And crucially, to allow true rest to be completely, utterly unproductive.
To make rest sacred again almost, by making it invisible to the market's demands for efficiency and optimization.
To simply exist, maybe just for a moment, outside that relentless expectation of continuous self-improvement, to just